This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Tansei, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Olette Stonechild, and I hope you're all enjoying your summer out there. I can't believe summer is almost over. I recorded this episode with Leah Gazan around a month ago, and it was shortly after the finding and the discovery of the unmarked and mass graves of Indigenous children here in Canada. We talk a bit about that, as well as her journey as a Canadian politician who was elected to represent the riding of Winnipeg Centre in the House of Commons in Canada in the 2019 Canadian federal election. Leah was born in Thompson, Manitoba, and she is Lakota Chinese on her mother's side and Jewish on her father's side. We talk about the power behind both of those lineages and how she brings them forward in the work that she's doing here today within herself, but also collectively. So without further ado, hi. I'm very excited to have Leah here with me today. Leah, thank you so much, for being here. If you just want to introduce yourself, where you're from, thank you so much.
Yes, hi. I'm so happy to be with you today from Treaty 1 territory, homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'm from Wood Mountain Lakota Nation in Treaty 4 territory, Saskatchewan. I know you're from Saskatchewan as well. And, you know, I'm a long way from home. I'm the member of parliament for Winnipeg Centre, but my heart is really with my home right now, especially with news coming out.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is we are currently filming this episode at the beginning of July, so the end of Indigenous History Month, and there has been over 1,000 bodies now found of Indigenous children throughout Turtle Island. And so how has the last month been for you? How are you feeling?
Well, I think we knew, we did know. I mean, it was in the Truth and Reconciliation report. You know, we know that this happened in residential schools. We knew that. This is not shocking. Part of me feels at peace knowing that children will be brought home. But it is a sad reminder of the genocide that took place at these schools. You know, in my last couple of weeks of Parliament, I was pushing for the government to acknowledge what happened in residential schools as an act of genocide that has left rippling impacts for residential school warriors who are reliving, you know, very severe trauma with the information coming out and intergenerational impacts. You know, I've been thinking a lot about my mom, who was in a Catholic orphanage as a kid who grew up in care the last couple of weeks. And, you know, as it's a really sad time. And I think in saying that, I want to tell a story actually about that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I actually have spent a lot of time reflecting on it. I like to write. I write a lot of poetry and stories. Today, I just got back to the city. I closed up shop in Ottawa at the end of the session and got back and went for my morning run. And the whole city was adorned with orange ribbons, the whole city. And and all the bridges. And as I was running by the bridges, I let the tips of my fingers touch those orange ribbons and let the spirit of our ancestors pierce my heart. And, you know, as sad as this time is, it's really beautiful to see people coming together in love and kindness to seek justice for the children, for nations that are reeling with grief right now. That's really beautiful. And it was really powerful for me this morning on my run.
Yeah, I can imagine. I felt that a couple days ago out here in Vancouver at the Parliament building, they had the Cancel Canada Day, and it was like the biggest turnout we've ever seen on the unceded Coast Salish territory. Everyone just coming together, all races, wearing orange, all standing in solidarity. And so that inspired me. Like, I think that's the silver lining of this is Canadians are now waking up to the truth that Indigenous people have always known, and hopefully we can come together to seek justice. And so I think that's my next question is, what do you think is needed at the hands of the Canadian government and maybe also the Catholic Church? I know you already said that they need to acknowledge that it's a genocide, but I feel like through acknowledgement, they would have to be accountable for that genocide. And so I feel like that's why they're probably not saying it, but I'm curious to know, like, what do we need to have justice take place?
Well, I think, I think it's important to note that as this is unraveling, they're still fighting residential school survivors in court from St. Anne's residential school survivors. I can't think of anything more violent than just having to justify your own genocide for years. They're still fighting First Nations kids in court. And let's not forget, this was part of a larger agenda. One of the reasons, and from the time of colonization, has been to get us off our lands. Residential school was one of the strategies to assimilate us, to get us off our lands, often resulting in death. I mean, Dr. Peter Bryce reported, we knew this in the 1940s, that 30 to 50% of kids attending these schools were deliberately infected with tuberculosis. This is recorded. This was shared by Dr. Peter Bryce, who worked for the government of the day. So we knew this was going on. So I think we need real action. I think the government needs to acknowledge exactly what happened and not put residential school warriors in a position where they have to justify whether their experience was genocide or not. What happened in residential school is clearly falls under Article 2 of the UN Convention on Genocide. Full stop. The government needed to immediately implement all the calls to action that came out of the TRC that relate to their jurisdiction and responsibility. They need to heed the calls to justice, the 231 calls to justice in the national inquiry into murdered and missing women and girls in Two-Spirit. They need to stop fighting residential school survivors in court. They need to stop fighting First Nations kids. And they need to stop violently removing Indigenous peoples off their lands, sometimes at the end of sniper guns. If we're going to reconcile in this country, we need truth. And if we have the truth, then we have to respond with the truth to ensure that Indigenous peoples in this place that we now call Canada are afforded minimum human rights, something that is not occurring today. And children continue to be impacted with what Murray Sinclair actually pointed out, former Senator Murray Sinclair, a couple of years ago, the child welfare system, which he likened to the new residential school system. I think we need to be honest about how normalized systemic racism and violence and ongoing genocide is, that our minimum human rights are still up for debate. We need to end that now.
Well, and the fact that they're putting, like, I think I read a post, like, over $100 million fighting residential school survivors in court. And it's like, what are you doing with that money when you could be putting that into our communities directly? Like, the fact that we're still talking about clean drinking water and all these things that happen in our communities, and there's literally been no action taken, it sometimes makes me feel hopeless. And so for me, for a citizen of Canada, what do we need to be doing to make sure that our actions and our voices are being implemented in Parliament, in the House of Commons? Is your suggestion just continuously writing, or is there other ways that people can start to take action?
Well, I can tell you this government, as all governments, spend between $500 million to $1 billion a year fighting Indigenous peoples in court. In fact, I just have I just requested information from Minister Bennett's office to find out how much her department has budgeted this year to fight Indigenous peoples in court.
Wow.
I want to know. I want to
Yeah.
know what the plan is in terms of trying to fight us against us realizing a respect of our minimum human rights. So I'll put
Yeah.
that out there. I think it's a powerful time. I was one of the organizers in Winnipeg during I Don't
Mhm.
Know More. It was, and I've been at this a long time. Like I'm almost 50 now. Like during the siege of Ganasatawge, I was in a tent in the front of the Manitoba legislature as an 18-year-old, camping out. And we were alone. Like, the
Mhm.
only allies I used to joke that we had were in a white van parked on the
Mm.
ground taking pictures, and I don't think they were allies. Right? Like we were totally alone. You see what happened the other day. People
Mhm.
need to recognize how powerful their voice is as an individual is
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
terms of pushing the pendulum. It doesn't matter what age you are either. Like, look at all the youth around the world who have put the climate emergency front and center.
Mhm.
Look at what happened in BC with
Yeah, I
youth
know.
standing
Yeah.
for justice for a protection of our Mother Earth, the waters, a clean, healthy, and safe environment as a human right, something that I had in a private member's bill that got violently taken down by
Mm.
all parties, by the Conservative and the Liberal parties. But they got 64 votes, but it was a long way from passing. But my Bill C 232. But I think we need to continue to organize at all levels.
Mm. Mhm.
um, I'm not going to tell somebody what action they have to take or should take. Just act. And we
Yeah,
act in
yeah.
different ways, like art,
Mhm.
writing,
Mhm.
writing, publishing, gatherings, taking up space in violent colonial spaces like the House of Commons,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
so just act.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point of we all have different ways of what activism looks like. And so like supporting one another, even though we may not sometimes agree with what one another is doing, because I know sometimes taking up space in a colonial space, sometimes people may not support that, but sometimes our voices are needed within the systems to actually create tangible change. And you brought up passing certain bills, and I'm actually curious to know, I was doing a little bit of research on Bill C-10. I don't know if you know Bill C-10, all about like
Yeah,
censorship that they're trying to pass, and like Bill
yeah.
C-36 about like what's hate speech online and you could potentially like get fined. I'm curious to know, like, are those bills actually going to be passed? Because I feel like that's going to affect my life as a content creator.
Yeah, so I don't
Mm.
actually, because the Senate has shut down for the session.
Mm.
Bill C-10, there was two key bills. Bill C-6 was the conversion therapy to make it
Mm.
illegal. Like the 50s called, they want their conversion therapy back. Like seriously, like the fact that we still in this country that practice is still legal is just abhorrent. And Bill C-10, both that were up for debate in the Senate. I don't think that we'll be coming back.
Mm. Sweet.
I think we will be going into an election. That's my prediction. We're supposed to go back on September 20th. I would find it very highly unlikely that we will, and in that case, those bills will die if we go
Mm.
into
A new
an election.
election. Well, that's
Yeah,
good to know. And then speaking about election, I know I've had a few questions coming in from my followers of how does one person, if you're Indigenous or even non-Indigenous, how does one person get into Parliament? What would your advice be for one seeking to get into the House of Commons?
well, here's the thing. So I was asked for about 10 years to run in different ways, like provincially, municipally, federally. I'm a longtime academic. So
Mm-hmm.
I had a really nice life. I actually really like thinking. and feeling. And in academia allowed me to do that. It gave me the privilege to be able to think and to reflect on thinking and share and learn. It's like being in a constant state of learning. Um, but I really felt like it was a critical juncture. Like we're really at a critical juncture. The ocean's on fire,
Yeah,
for Pete's
literally.
sake. That is literally on fire. You know, we're in a pandemic, what I've been calling a growing corporate dictatorship, where we see growing inequality and a normalization of violating human rights. I think more so than becoming a politician, I think it's about having purpose. You know, I ran, my vision was very clear. I'm a longtime grassroots person, that I wanted to bring voices on the outside and the inside. And I've stayed true to that promise in saying that it's a tough go. There's no more colonial place than the House of Commons. Let's not forget that's where they wrote the Indian Act. And I think to go there with purpose, to not make it about yourself, but about the people that you represent, that your obligation is to lift up voices on the ground. So a lot of the things that I bring to the House of Commons are just elevating voices on the ground to give space and place, particularly for voices that haven't been represented. I encourage, you know, to get involved, even if you want to get into this kind of politic, to work on campaigns. But I think most important is to have reason. Like, why am I doing this? You know, and for me, I just felt like my community, which is the third poorest riding in the country, really needed somebody to like fight hard to get housing, to deal with the human rights crisis that we have in Winnipeg Centre. You know, we have a beautiful community in Winnipeg, particularly Winnipeg Centre. We are leaders, I believe, in many movements around the country. We have heart, we have grit. You know, as much disparity, we have that will to fight for justice. It is an incredible riding to represent, and knowing who you are. You know, knowing who you are, where you come from, what you value, and having clear bottom lines. So I think this is really important. I don't want to go on and on, but you know, when you're in that environment and it's so racist, the only thing you have is your identity. And that becomes your shield in the world. And you only have your integrity. So when I ran, I had 5 clear bottom lines, and here they are. Is how I'm voting, does it honor human rights? Does it honor Indigenous rights? Will we meet climate targets? And are you asking me to break the rule of law? Because the rule of law has nothing to do with policing. It has to do with upholding the Constitution. And that includes Aboriginal rights and title, in fact. That includes ensuring that people's human rights, minimum human rights, are met in this country. So those are my bottom lines. Those are my and to stay true to my integrity. And if it meets that 5 criteria, I'm on board. If it doesn't, I'm not on board. And I've stayed true to that. That's tough, and it can be lonely at times.
I was going to say, because I could imagine walking into the House of Commons just knowing that it was the very same institution that put harm in Indigenous communities, and oftentimes feeling like the only one there. And so I'm curious to know, how do you reclaim your power and your truth when you are maybe questioning yourself or feeling overwhelmed or burnt out? How do you remain rooted and authentic in your power?
Well, you know, I mean, I've been at this a long time, you know, so like, you know, I'm almost 50. And I think that, you know, I've had my trials and tribulations, a lot of them. I actually work out every day.
Sweet.
I do like deadlifting.
Oh, nice. Nice.
like I don't do light cardio. I like lift heavy weights and like deadlift and throw it on the ground and, I went for a 6K jog this morning because I haven't worked out for a couple of weeks, and I saw the orange ribbons, and I just touched those ribbons, and it gives me time to reflect and think, and I write.
Writing,
I
yeah,
write
yeah.
poetry, I write stories. My mom was a sun dancer, and so I have that connection with spirit, and so I never really feel alone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I never feel alone because I always feel like I'm carrying my ancestors in my heart. And I know that some people might think that sounds corny, but I always say, like, my ancestors, my parents, they're my ancestors now, my relatives, I carry them in my heart. And it just gives me strength. And to
Mm-hmm.
know it's bigger than me, I'm very
Yeah,
privileged.
yeah.
I am so privileged to have that seat. You know, if I wasn't there, who would be taking up that space? It is a privilege. I never lose sight of that privilege. I have a home that I get to live in. I have clean drinking water.
Mm-hmm.
I have food security at this point in my life. It's a lot of privilege. Uh, I respect that privilege. And I work really hard and I fight hard for the people who trusted me to represent them because I love this community.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it is an honor to be able to represent the good people of Winnipeg Centre because we are. I'm telling you, I got back yesterday. I said to my partner, I just feel so good to be home. And then when I was running today, and I see the bridges adorned all throughout the riding in red and orange ribbons, I said, we are such a good community. How loving
Mm-hmm.
and kind. That is so loving and kind. I'm getting emotional, but I
Yeah.
love this. I really do love this community. It is a really special community, and I feel really privileged.
Well, I think that's beautiful to know that, like, that's how I feel like running in parliament, or when you are in parliament, like that's how you should be. It's not really for you. It's not individualistic. It's for the greater good and for community and coming back to kinship and coming back to even your relatives and like the generation before you is why you're still able to keep going. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about your relatives and where you grew up and what that was like for you. Because you said you were an academic before you got into parliament, but what about that? Like when you were younger, what was your dream and how did you get to where you are now?
So I have quite a story.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people know. So my father was a Holocaust survivor from Holland. He was the only surviving child after the war. 5 survivors, both sides of my family in total. So the fact that I'm here as a descendant of the only surviving child of the Holocaust is pretty amazing. My mom was a Chinese Lakota woman from Wood Mountain Lakota Nation. Grew up in
Mm-hmm.
care because my grandmother could not look after her, so ended up on the streets at 5 years of age, was in 15 different placements um, between the age of 5 and 18. And so I have that common story of a family that has been pretty much decimated by child welfare and residential schools. That's my story, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the story of my family and community. And my family has really suffered in as a result of that. So my mom, I was luckily, my mom was a historian and wanted to learn about her family, and so that's how we connected with my nation. And
Mm.
so it's really interesting when you are a descendant of genocides from 2 parts of the world because you learn culture and community through family and a community. The only community I had, my grandfather was kind of a love him and leave him type. I'm not going to give you a family studies course here. So this is a true story. My other side of the family was killed during the war, and so the only culture and community I've ever been able to identify is with my relatives from Wood Mountain Lakota Nation. And it's a beautiful place. It's a powerful place. I think we could be the smallest reserve in the country right now. There was 17 people there, 17, 1-7.
Wow.
But it's actually the place where Sitting Bull had his last Sundance. And when you walk through the hills, like it's beautiful hilly place in Saskatchewan. You can feel that spirit there. So I think coming from that kind of background, and coming from such a powerful history, um, teaches you resilience. It's like um, you learn. It's in your blood memory.
I was just going to say that you're like, you don't even really have to try to be resilient because you're inherently resilient. I mean, to have come from survivors of the Holocaust, I was watching Dr. Gaber Mate, I believe his name is, and he talks about trauma and how it influences us. And he was like, I don't want to compare trauma with trauma, but like what happened in the Holocaust and what happened here in Canada had the like same effects on people's bloodlines and people's lineages. And so I'm curious to know, like, do you see a similarity or differences? Obviously, they're very two differences, but to have them both within your bloodline, like I can see how you're so powerful and continue to keep your voice going and demand change.
Well, I think, I mean, growing up with two survivors of genocide, like it was pretty intense in my family. Like it was so intense that when I was younger, my father said, if I didn't have a family, I'd be fighting with the Sandinistas. Like it was like that. It was like super intense. But my father was a really special guy, you know. He used to say, like, genocide is genocide. Like, let's not have the oppression Olympics.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, you know, he always highlighted the genocide of Indigenous peoples. In Canada as being a similar kind of genocide, but an ongoing genocide. And I have to say, like, as a younger person, like growing up, coming from that kind of background in my 20s, I went for counseling because, I say to people who are settlers, I say, look, I've had to go for therapy to deal with my colonial trauma. You need to deal with your own stuff. I've had to spend a lifetime dealing with my stuff. But looking at my history, it was in my younger 20s that I realized how the things that I was experiencing were very much connected to both histories in my family. I've made no bones about it. What happened and what is continuing to happen in this place we now call Canada is willful genocide. What happened in residential school was genocide, full stop. And I don't know if you've read the article on the Article 2 that defines the UN Convention on Genocide.
I haven't yet.
But I'm going to read it to you. I think it's important. And and I kept reading it over and over and over again in the House of Commons until finally one of the members of Parliament from the Liberal government, I asked it over and over again, acknowledged that, yes, that would fall under the UN Convention of Genocide. I'm just looking it up here.
Why do you think that they won't say it's genocide?
Well, I think it has international implications. Certainly no country wants to acknowledge their own genocide. But for whatever reasons, if we are ever going to reconcile in this country, we need the truth. And what happened and what continues to happen, in Canada, is genocide. So the convention, this is the Article 2 of the UN Convention on Genocide. It's the definition of genocide. There's no UN convention for cultural genocide. It's either genocide or it's not genocide. It says, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, or religious group as such. A, killing members of the group. B, causing seriously bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D, imposing measures intended to present births within the group. E, forcefully transferring children of the group to another group. It's very clear to me.
Yeah.
Very clear. And let's not forget that young girls were sterilized in residential schools, and Indigenous women today continue to be forcefully sterilized in this country.
I was just going to bring up that a lot of the time people think that this is a thing of a past, but they don't understand that this is like the entire foundation that Canada has been built upon and continues to. Like you're saying, the forced sterilization, missing murdered Indigenous women and girls, and Two-Spirit crisis. My cousin, I don't know if you know him, Breen Ouellette, he's actually running for NDP Vancouver Centre. Yeah, that's my cousin. So
I love Breen. He's so wonderful.
He's so good and he's so smart, and I'm just like, we both come from the same lineage, so I can feel like his power behind his words. But I was just listening to him talk last week, and he was like, this is genocide and apartheid, and the Canadian government, the federal institution, needs to go to international courts for this. And I was like, is that even possible? Like, he didn't even put that into my awareness until he said that. He's like, they need to go to international courts. So now he's trying to find like Indigenous lawyers to team up with to start to create some kind of momentum or movement, because Canada does need to take accountability. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they're just avoiding it for as long as they can because it comes with a price tag, and there's a lot of things they need to be doing.
Well, I think it's one step at a time. I think first we need truth. You know, I think that you asked a question. I think with my father's side, you know, the acknowledgement of genocide, that gives me some peace that experience and the intergenerational impacts that's had, which means that I had no family. That's what that means. When your whole family is killed, it means you have no family. I know what that feels like. I know what that feels like. It feels terrible. So to have it acknowledged for what it is, it matters. That's not true for my mom, who experienced the worst abuses. My sweet mother, who was, you know, luckily very gifted. So she survived, became an award-winning psychiatric nurse, changed legislation for people with mental health issues. So she was one of the people, in fact, that started the program so that people suffering from mental health issues could live in the community in Saskatchewan, in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, award-winning psychiatric nurse, social worker, researcher. She survived, but never in her life was her experience acknowledged. And I remember her telling me a story, and I thought it was so funny up until about a week ago when all of this came out. She said, you know, when I was in the convent, they used to send us out to pick choke cherries. And I love choke cherries. My mom loved choke cherries. Said, oh, I love choke cherries. You know how I love choke cherries. So as I was picking, I was eating as much as I was picking, and I was trying to be sneaky. So I was taking my white cloth in the front, and I was wiping my teeth with it. So of course, she's a little person. She came back and her whole bib was purple. And they said, Marjorie, were you eating choke cherries? And she said, nope, 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 nope. Marjorie, you were eating choke cherries. Nope, 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 nope. And she told me that story. But I can't imagine the punishment. That's the part of the story that she never shared with me, for eating those choke cherries. I've been thinking a lot about those choke cherries. What happened to my mother was genocide. What happened to that side of my family and the impacts that it has had on my family is genocide. How violent to do that to nations of people and children and families and then deny it. That's violent. That is so violent to me. They need to stop being violent. They need to stop fighting residential school children in court. They need to stop fighting First Nations kids in court. They need to stop using militarized police to drag us off our lands like it's some sort of normal behavior. They need to stop the violence. If we are going to reconcile in this country, we need truth and we need justice. And that means respecting human rights. This is not a lot to ask. And as I see these orange ribbons adorned on the bridges, people are getting it. How kind and loving. How kind and loving, that acknowledgement of truth. That is powerful.
Yeah.
That was probably the most powerful jog. And as I was at about 4 kilometers in and I wanted to quit, and I saw those orange ribbons and I thought, I'm going to jog to the end for those beautiful little children who never made it home. I'm going to make it. I'm going to be strong and I'm going to fight for justice. In my moment of reflection, as I said, and then I wrote a poem when I got back. I'm going to tweet it out today with a picture. Yeah. To honor the children.
Yeah. I think that's so important. And just to know that it is genocide. And sometimes even I like to distance myself from my own family story because it feels so overwhelming to feel. And knowing that this is the driving force that creates change is through our feeling and through our emotions and through processing it, whatever way that looks. And I think for non-Indigenous people, there are often a lot of questions of like, well, how can I support Indigenous communities? Like, how can I support reconciliation? Like, what does that look like? And if you were to offer a piece of advice for non-Indigenous people out there, what would your advice be to start the relationship building and to start the reconciliation process?
Well, I think we need to talk about privilege and power. And part of reconciling means sharing privilege and power. I mean, corporations certainly that seem to have more privilege than Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island. They're certainly not ready to give up their privilege and power. Corporations that are supported by governments of all stripes, of all parties. I think, we need to get real about why things are the way they are today. And we need to reconcile, with our history and how it's reflected today. The same agenda is reflected still today. So when I hear a dark chapter, it's not a dark chapter. It's an ongoing book with multiple chapters. So I think we need to acknowledge truth, and then we need action. We need real action to make sure that justice is achieved, and that means proper housing, access to clean drinking water, a toilet, the ability to raise our own children, the ability to speak our languages, to practice our spirituality, and that is connected to land, because when you dispossess people of their land, you dispossess them of their power. Our culture is directly rooted in our lands. We need to acknowledge that. So I think we have a long way to go. I think there's very clear actions that could be taken tomorrow. I mean, it's huge. We have 231 calls to justice. We have TRC calls to action, some related to the federal government, and other institutions like the Catholic Church, for example, should pay the $25 million in retribution that's owed, for example. The Pope should apologize, not saying we feel for you, but the Pope needs to apologize. We have, I said, the 231 calls to justice, the calls to action, stop fighting residential school survivors in court, stop fighting First Nations kids. And just to add, in the TRC, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is mentioned 16 times as the framework for reconciliation. Bill C-15 was passed, but those fundamental rights need to be lifted up and honored. because I don't think the colonial government's behavior is going to change. It's another legal tool, but they need to lift it up now.
Yeah, I've been hearing that. I was hearing someone else talk, and they're saying, I have no faith in the federal institution, but I have faith that if we keep doing it from different angles, that we may actually create change. And so I'm hoping to see that for the next 2021. And that brings me up to my next question. Like, what do you have in store for the rest of your year for 2021? How is that looking for you? What's on the horizon for you?
Well, we just finished session. I love my community. I'm actually, heading out in the community after the podcast. I cannot wait to just hang with the good people of Winnipeg Centre. Frontline organizations keep fighting for resources. We've managed to get some really cool projects, housing projects like the village at the Thunderbird House, which is kind of like a meeting place, low barrier, 24 low barrier housing for people experiencing the worst mental health and trauma, in fact, issues of poverty, a low barrier space so people can just, which will have a place for ceremony, a place for sleeping in warmth, supports. It's with lots of wraparound supports. We had, after many years of battle, a 24/7 safe space finally opened for women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA folks in our riding. And I'm really looking forward to working with the brilliance of Winnipeg Centre and the leaders on the ground in Winnipeg Centre to keep building our community, to be a human rights beacon. Let's not a community that's riddled with human rights violations, but a community that honors the human rights of all of our constituents.
Well, it always comes back to community and coming back to kinship. And I know you mentioned your mother a few times in this conversation. And so I'm curious to know, how would you define a matriarch, and are there matriarchs that you are currently inspired by?
Well, I think my mother, because I've been thinking a lot about my mother. My mother went through horrific experiences in her life, yet she, at the end of her life, she was so gentle and loving. And she had this way, I'm writing a story about my mom, but she had this way of making everybody feel like they were the special one. And that is a real gift. She emulated kindness, and she was very quietly spiritual, even though she was like a lead sun dancer. She was very quiet in her spirituality, very humble, very gentle, very non-judgmental, and very kind, and taught me probably one of the most important lessons in life, honoring her matriarch, which was her mother. I wrote a chapter about it, actually. I loved my mom. I adored my mom. And, one day I asked her, Mom, how can you forgive your mother? Like, she left you on the streets, Mom. Like, I couldn't imagine somebody treating my mother with such disregard, and me trying to understand my grandmother. And she said, Leah, my mother, in spite of everything she went through, she was a terrible alcoholic, but during the pregnancy, she gave me everything I needed to be okay in life. She didn't drink, a good mind, a healthy body. She did the best she could with what she knew. And for that, I will always love her. That is really powerful teachings of forgiveness. And certainly, as I get older and, kind of reflect on what power truly is, what my role in the world is. My role, I feel, not doesn't mean that I'm not going to fight for things, but to be fiercely kind. Kindness is powerful. And the matriarchs that I revere want to honor my mother right now, just because of the news coming out. I really feel a need to honor my mother. But the matriarchs that I revere are fearlessly loving and kind. And I'll tell you one last thing, because I know we're coming to an end. For a long time, I fought, because I told you it was intense growing up. It was like we were always at rallies. There was never a time like during the apartheid movement with South Africa, I was at socials raising money. Like my parents were always like frontline activists my whole life. And then I was fighting, and I'm like fighting, and I'm always I'm working full-time academic and doing activism, doing 17-hour days. And then one day I was just exhausted. I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I doing this? And I thought, I know what I'm doing. I'm fighting for the right to joy. I'm fighting for the right to joy for myself, for my son, for my family and community, because everything was put in place to rip us of our joy. So being joyous and joyful and loving and kind is a revolutionary act.
Literally.
So that's what I want to move for. I want to be joyous. I want to celebrate with community. I want to build on all our goodness and kindness and strength, because we are still here and we are powerful.
That is such a good note to end on, because we got to be talking as much about our joy and our celebration and our successes as much as our trauma. It's the balance of both energies to become whole and to become integrated and to walk this world in a healthy way. And I'm very excited to see what you have in store for the rest of 2021, and also our communities, also the Winnipeg community out there. I'm watching you online. Hopefully I can visit sometime soon.
Oh, please do. You will love it.
Yeah.
It is a beautiful place.
Yeah, I've only been there like twice, and I haven't really had a taste of the community yet. And I need to, after talking to you, I'm like, I need to go back and I need to visit and spend some time out there.
Yeah, you will love it. And please let me know and I'll take you around.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Last question. How can people support you and your work and everything that you're up to?
Well, I think we're going into an election, so if you want to donate, but just kidding, but not. But just volunteer. But I think at the end of the day, we're really unimportant. I think you can help me by keeping the movement building, whether it's for climate justice, human rights, pushing the calls to justice for the national inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, pushing the government to implement their calls, their responsibility to calls to action coming from the TRC, speaking out so that we stop. We are at a critical juncture. And when you are rising, when we rise, it empowers voices on the inside to fight for change. I'm just another branch of all of our efforts to fight for a better world.
I love that perception. You're like a conduit into the House of Commons for the community. I love that. I love that reflection and that representation. Well, thank you so much,
thank you,
Leah, for being here, for sharing your story.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I'm feeling inspired. Make sure to follow Leah's work. You can also follow her on Instagram.
Yeah. So can I give you my handles?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I believe, so it's Leah Gazan on Twitter.
Sweet.
It's Leah Gazan on Instagram. I don't even know my handles. Isn't that funny? And I believe it's Leah Gazan MP on Facebook.
Awesome.
Yeah, so follow me online. That would be great.
Yeah, I'll drop the handles in the description. Hi. Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at matriarch.movement, and don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.